Dear students, good morning, my dears, from my disassembled room, which thank goodness you cannot see. It's so horrible a mess since we're in the middle of this move to another house. However, it's here, and I'm still here, gazing out at a slightly dubious morning, not the fiery morning that we've been having recently in this heat wave, and thinking about what I could say that might be helpful to you in making the terrible transition to Malcolm Lowry's world. I've just been rereading what for me are the most beautiful 40 pages of Stream of Consciousness ever penned, and that is the span of 40 pages, 30 pages in any other edition, I think. The span of chapter 5, where the consul has woken up and is awaiting the return of his wife and his brother, which at first he doesn't know that they've gone, and is talking to his neighbor, the walnut grower, Mr. Quincy, and then to Dr. Vigil. And as he does so, the morning progresses, but he has difficulty figuring out at what stage of the morning he is. Is he remembering things that just happened or happened several hours ago, or are they happening now? And his drunken state, or his post-drunken state, or his rolling drunken state, part of it post-drunk and part of it currently drunk, lends to the very world of Stream of Consciousness a quite different tinge. After all, the stream continues in a semi-coherent fashion if you cite yourself as the writer and reader in the mind of a character. But it's even more cloudy and strange if you cite yourself in the mind and soul of a drunken character. So this lends something quite special to Stream of Consciousness when it is the consul who carries the narration. As you will have noticed if you haven't fallen down a ravine in the book already and been unable to get up, the narration is carried forward in this book in quite formal fashion, considering how difficult the book sometimes is to follow. We have a different narrator for each chapter, very seemly and very simple, and not at all like the world of Virginia Woolf, where you flit from mind to mind. We start off with Monsieur Laruelle, and we proceed to the consul and Hugh and Yvonne herself, his wife, and they each have a shot at telling us what the world looks like from inside their respective head. So this is not easy stuff, and certainly the chapter that I just sang is so wonderful, chapter 5, is not easy because the mind of the consul is so full of things difficult for us to apprehend. As Stephen Spender, the author of this laborious foreword that I've told you don't have to read, which might make you think, oh, perhaps I should read that. As Stephen Spender says, this book is difficult in a variety of ways, not least of which is its autobiographical aspects. We've looked at the autobiographical elements of Virginia Woolf, of course, in these two novels of hers that we've read, but at least the references, I think, can be teased out by a reader who's not aware of all the details of her life. That's much harder in Under the Volcano, where an enormous amount of autobiographical material is being hinted at, some of which we can follow if we've studied Lowry's life, when he's referring, for instance, in that very chapter that I'm talking about, chapter 5, to old Abraham Taskerson, the poet who plucked out the young consul, the young Geoffrey Firmin, the Anglo-Irish orphan, and raised him as one of his own. But sometimes it's hard to know who the consul is referring to. Among his many interlocutors, into his head come many voices. And this adds to the usual element in stream of consciousness of the presence of memory and people who are not actually there at any given moment except in our heads. It adds to that gallery immensely, so that there's a great chorus of speakers in the consul's head, which has to do not only with the nature of stream of consciousness and how our minds work, but also, in the consul's case, with being an alcoholic and being unclear as to who is really there and who isn't, who is in your head. So these are the formal properties of the book. That each chapter has a narrator and carries you forwards. But the world of the book is hard to parse, I would imagine, for many of you, in part because suddenly the real political, geographical world, which wasn't so much of a problem in Woolf's books, is to the fore here, because we are in Mexico with its complicated history involving things like the French army, the Austrian emperor of Mexico. Very bizarre history with its revolutions and its terrible rulers and its wonderful idealistic visionaries, its language, its landscape, its creatures, its insects, its animals, all these things, quite strange, particularly if you've never been to Mexico or read much about Mexico. Very, very strange indeed. A lot of references that you would have to let go, especially if you have no Spanish. All of this makes it harder, except in a chapter like chapter 4, the idyllic chapter that Hugh, Geoffrey Firmin's half-brother, narrates for us, where he and Firmin's wife Yvonne go riding through the landscape to the former Emperor Maximilian's palace, and that is told relatively calmly and clearly, and we know that Hugh has been involved in the war that I've asked you which war it is. Perhaps I shouldn't mention it in this video. I've asked you in the quiz, which war are they talking about? There is a war that takes place between the First and the Second World War in Europe of great importance, and in which Hugh is currently involved and which preoccupies the minds of all the expatriates in the book. So drink is the subject, or perhaps not the subject of the book, but the medium. It is, as I forget whether it's Spender or Tholman, who the afterword writer, who says, it is the greatest book about being drunk that's ever been written, which may or may not endear this book to you, but undoubtedly that is true. And it's possible, I think, to inspect that aspect of the book with sympathy and interest, not as being, oh, must I read this book about this drunken man? Which personally, I have to tell you, dear students, is of no great interest to me. I'm not tremendously sympathetic to drunks. I mean, I'm as sympathetic as I am to anybody suffering from a disease, but it's not my favorite one. I've spent, oh God, many evenings sober among beloved drunks, dear friends, and helped to carry them home. But drunkenness itself is not a state that in others I greatly prize. So that itself will be rather an ordeal. Yet the point of drunkenness, in regard to its importance, what lends the book its importance, despite the fact that it's about a drunk, is really to have to reframe the question, because it's about a drunk, what makes it significant for us? And drunkenness is the central character and the author's response to the crisis of the modern world. And it's what lends this book, as a masterpiece of modernism, its peculiar force. You look at the world in despair, and there is no way forward except through the lens of drink. No reason to stop throwing yourself off a parapet in despair at the human condition. And that's very much to the fore in this book. History itself, human history coming towards a terrible crisis, is the central subject, even though it's not present except through the mind of a very erratic person However, that is what lends the book its greater significance, other than a tour de force of style, writing in people's heads some wonderful, delicious passages, some of which I hope you will extract for me, the ones that appeal to you, and so that rather than talking about falling down drunk, something that I have asked you about in the quiz, you can consider, if you can find a way to it, the reasons that this book has been so admired. It's expression of a response to a deep crisis in humanity itself, expressed through primarily through the mind of a brilliant man, Geoffrey Firmin, who is destroying himself in despair at the prospect of anywhere to go in this world to live a sane life in this crazy world. Something that's, I think, only makes more sense to us these days when we look around. So I just wanted to place that before you as the book's raison d'etre, as the book's reason for existing, or rather reason for being, high on the list, number 11 on a recent list of the 100 greatest books ever, or perhaps the greatest books of the 20th century. Great books, anyway. Its excuse for being there, the reason that people place it there, is not so much that it's a wonderful, multicolored, technicolor, reel through a man's intoxicated mind, although it is that, but because that whole project, how does such a man survive? Can he survive? What does he think? How are his thoughts organized? Only claims our interest in as much as all of us are attempting to find a solution to the question, how can one live? Where can one live? How do we deal with the overwhelming cruelty of our species to each other? And although these are not philosophical questions that Geoffrey Firmin addresses directly, although he addresses many of them indirectly and in spasms and little gems of thought, nonetheless, they are the context. Is it possible to have a true and beautiful marriage in a life that has become itself hell? Not hell because you're a drunk and you drive everybody crazy, including yourself, but because seen objectively, it's the political scene, the social scene, the human scene is polluted by ourselves. And what should we do about this? We can live a well-regulated life like Mr. Quincy, the walnut grower who lives next to Geoffrey Firmin there in Mexico, and water our beautifully tailored and clipped lawn and grow our walnut trees and disapprove of the crazy drunk next door in his crazy jungle of a garden. Or we can live with him, with Geoffrey Firmin, for a day, the crazy life of a profoundly intelligent human being, extremely well-read, extremely cultivated, difficult for us to read because that cultivation extends into areas into which we cannot always follow him. But that's the choice. If we take on the desperation of a man like Geoffrey Firmin, looking for a way through that is not burying the terrible truths about humanity in order to survive them, then we're likely to be in the land of chaos, which is where this extraordinary book takes place. I hope you can find chips and chinks of it to enjoy. Don't get bogged down by the difficulties. Swim across and over them and onto the next wave, and see if there is stuff in this book that could attract you, perhaps to read it again one day. I've found it very rewarding to return to, as have many readers. So I wish you well of it. I will come back to you with a little bit more when you've got a little bit further on. But we need to make that soon. We still have another book to read, and I want us to get through this large, difficult, extraordinary work of literature to move on to something simpler in the form of Orwell's 1984. Go well, my dears. Be safe, please. Look after yourselves. Take no risks. Bye-bye.